And we continue with the Promethean Mate, the NT. The mate of Promethean NT may well believe that the NT is quite oblivious to his welfare and may see him as unaware of daily events which make up the stream of homely family life. The mate of an NT may long for more frequent verbalized expressions of affection and concern on the part of the NT. The NT, on the other hand, would probably be amazed that his or her way of relating and loving is experienced by the mate as aloof or uncaring. I know everything looks crooked in my video, but everything is crooked. All right, we're going to continue. NTs do seem rather cold and unemotional to other temperaments. They tend to control and hide their emotions behind an immobile facial stance, with only the eyes transmitting depth of reaction. A public display of emotion or affection is particularly repugnant to an NT. Because of the NT's distaste for stating the obvious or being redundant, the NT is apt to verbalize expressions of affection rather infrequently. To other types, this seems cold and miserly, and they often are hurt by the withholding. To the NT, stating what is already established is raising doubt where there is none. The commitment has been made, the position has been taken, and this commitment stands until notified. Therefore, clearly, it is unnecessary and inappropriate to restate the established and obvious. In establishing sexual relationships, NTs are not likely to give in to impulse, getting involved on a spur-of-the-moment basis. Rather, they are likely to think through relationships carefully, giving prolonged consideration to projections. Once the matter is thought through, the NT is ready to proceed with investing in the relationship. If it does not work out, the NT is likely to shrug his or her shoulders and turn away, perhaps with only mild regrets. Once an NT has made a decision, however, a change of heart is not likely to occur on his or her part, provided, of course, that a response has been forthcoming from the recipient. And in all likelihood, the NT will develop the relationship as he or she has conceived it. If the situation calls for a long-term commitment, a long-term commitment is made. If the situation calls for a short-term involvement, a short-term investment is made. Peculiar dynamic is here likely to occur. When the NT's intent is a long-term commitment, this fact is not likely to be verbalized, since for the NT this intent is obvious. But if the relationship is to be short-term, this fact is likely to be verbalized, just in case it is not obvious. NTs are likely to honor a personal commitment once made, even though the relationship was not consummated as satisfactorily as anticipated. Nor is the NT likely to verbalize any disappointment or dissatisfaction if such is the case. The NT mate is not apt to hold mates responsible for discord. Usually the burden of doing whatever needs to be done will be seen by NTs as their own responsibility. The NTs as a group do not thrive on conflict at a personal level. They do enjoy intellectual dispute, but quarreling on an emotional level is something NTs find destructive. Generally, an NT will walk away from this kind of interaction. NTs often have a curious amorality related to the generally accepted standards of sexual behaviors. The rules of society have little pressure for NTs, but their own idiosyncratic standards of conduct do. These usually have been carefully considered and are followed with or without society's approval. The sexual ethics of an NT are generally his own. They may or may not conform to the general mores of sexual behavior current at any given time. Establishing a sexual or social relationship with an NT, especially introverted NTs, usually requires more investment of time and energy than with other types. This is especially in contrast with SPs, who are more ready to establish relationships. Often, types who are not NTs are unwilling to invest the time and energy required to relate to an NT. Even the extroverted NTs, although apparently easy to get to know, are actually fairly difficult to understand, for the personality structure of an NT is characteristically complex and at times even convoluted. Friends and mates of NTs repeatedly express surprise at a facet of character they find in the NT, one that had not been apparent previously. Female NTs, in particular, are apt to have their sexuality overlaid with intellectualism. Their preference for the logical can be obscure expressions of their feelings, which may or may not be well developed. If not, the NT female may have difficulty with orgasmic responses unless her partner takes the time and makes the effort and understands the necessity of making a sexual approach through mutual exploration of intellectual concepts. It is unlikely that an NT female will be sexually stimulated by a partner who is not her intellectual equal. Male NTs have a somewhat different expectation concerning intellectual equality. The preference here is for equality at most and some, but not too much. Inferiority at best. Obviously, this places the intellectually gifted female in a position of limited appropriate NT choices. In any event, both female and male NTs can bring to a sexual relationship a willingness to explore possibilities of erotic arousal, if they have so marked it out as one of their areas of competency. NTs can be quite expert in sexual technology. They are very apt to possess skills in both the physical and psychological logistics involved in sexual intercourse, and to understand well the necessity for this relationship to be based on a wide variety of common interests outside the bedroom. Unlike the NF, who might consider it unromantic to study carefully scientific treatises on sexuality, Masters and Johnson from 1966. NTs would be likely to do so, finding it relatively easy to translate these objective findings into creative, sexual, sensual behavior. Outside the bedroom, NTs seem to have more difficulty than other types in engaging in play. They are on the whole apt to be rather serious, finding it amusing to dialogue at what they might call the seventh plane of irreality, a pastime which other types are apt to find rather dull. For the NT, the amusing and humorous are usually subtle, and more often than not based on a play on words. They especially enjoy humor, which contains an unexpected double meaning. But unlike the SPs, and at times the SJs, they do not enjoy ribald sexual stories or practical jokes, and find their recounting of both somewhat offensive, especially in mixed company. A few Deep relationships are the usual pattern of an NT's emotional history. Promiscuity is typically regarded with distaste. The experience of partner swapping is apt to repel an NT, who would, in all probability, find this experience psychologically scarring. The NT mate is not likely to discuss past personal involvements with a mate or with others, and almost never discusses a mate with friends. Sensuality begins for an NT in the imagination, as it does for an NF. Both types are capable of nuances of appreciation of the erotic, which those with S preferences might find irrelevant or even unfathomable. As a sexual partner, an NT can be highly creative, imaginative, and exciting. The degree of satisfaction for an NT in a relationship will be correlated with the depth of the relationship. Still, mere sexual release is sometimes seen as necessary, particularly if sexual tensions are getting in the way of important work. In that event, the tension is cared for with dispatch and as conveniently as possible. NTs tend to be relatively uninterested in acquiring wealth, and as mates, therefore, tend to be satisfied with modest comfort. Possession, as an end in itself, seems not to motivate NTs. Rather, enjoyment in the beauty of an object, pleasures of design and building, pleasure in elegant functioning and possessions, all motivate an NT. A vintage car, a classic airplane, an elegant art object, owned or not, give pleasure to an NT. This characteristic NT trait, enjoying without needing to possess, often causes mates who do not share this detachment some impatience. The NT's usual disinterest in acquiring material wealth, beyond that necessary for reasonable security and comfort, can also provide some dissonance in the mating relationship. Although an NT, periodically, is inspired to acquire wealth, this urge seldom lasts long enough to acquire that fortune. The NT's attention quickly turns once again to the theoretical, and the momentary interest in becoming wealthy dissipates, only to return from time to time with the same result. NTs seldom, however, lose interest in owning books and knowledge. These hold their interest year after year, and an NT's home is likely to be well lined with books. In fact, the non-NT mate of an NT often perceives the NT as directing exclusive attention to the world of theory and techniques at the expense of giving sufficient attention to the mate. Although NTs may seem oblivious to the home life going about them, they usually show interest when these events are brought to attention. NTs are somewhat vague about social time, especially the introverted NTs, and may be unaware, unless reminded, what hour, day, date, or season it is. This can lead to difficulty in the mating relationship, when the mate is a type to whom anniversaries, birthdays, and the like are important. Both NTs and introverted NFs tend to develop intimate relationships rather slowly. Intellectual development seems to proceed at a faster rate than does social development. For both NTs and NFs, communications sent through the physical relationship are apt to become more and more complex over time, with their approaches to the sexual encounter threaded with subtleties, and symbolism. The sexual act is usually given meaning beyond mere release from sexual tension. Sexual contact for the introverted NT may be less frequent than for the extroverted NT. Routines of daily living, such as working, especially if these daily routines are fraught with conflict, can be quite repressive to the emotional and sexual readiness of the NT, especially the introverted NT, as well as the introverted NF. NTs may engage in the sex act as a profound expression of love, or at the opposite extreme, as an act of self-humiliation and self-denigration, resulting in disgust for self. And the final paragraph. NTs usually take family responsibilities seriously, particularly their own responsibility to members of their family, including their parents. They are, however, often perceived by members of the family as having more psychological distance between themselves and others than do other types. The NT tends not to own the behaviors or body of his mate, as might other types. The errors of others, whether family members or not, are not the NT's errors and are handled objectively. The NT's own errors are those which are inexcusable and unforgivable. Parenting is usually a pleasure, therefore, for an NT who seems to watch the growth of children and a mate with joy, but as somewhat of a bystander. And that is the end of that one. We're continuing with the book, Please Understand Me, Character and Temperament Types by David Kiersey and Marilyn Bates. I appreciate you.